Hi, guys.
Talking
We'll
about
start
people
again.
watching you.
Yes, let's. All
Talking
right.
about people watching you.
Take
Why
two.
don't you just tell us where? Yeah,
Take
tell
two.
us where you were last week and talk about people that are watching you.
Yes. Okay. So I was in
Not
New
us,
York.
Jay. Not us.
Yes.
No.
No, not us. Her. Yeah, they're watching her.
No.
I was in New York and in Boston.
People actually block us out. I've heard.
Oh my God. I didn't even tell them about you guys. I'm like,
Okay.
it's just AI.
Why
I
would
do
you?
the whole show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's.
But I met some really nice people who love education and told us how much it means to them. And that meant a lot to me because, sometimes you feel like you're just talking into a microphone and you don't know who's listening. So it meant a lot to hear that this means something to people. And I really appreciate that. So anyway, just wanted to give a shout out to those people. Yeah. How about you guys?
Well,
Everything
we're
okay?
great.
we got a
We're great.
message.
I mean,
we got a message.
we have a message.
We got a message from
Jay.
Hi, Jay.
Well, no, a separate message. We got a message on Substack saying that my nose was stuffy for the last couple of podcasts, and they heard me sniffling, so they asked me to stop doing that. So
who was that?
Now it's my turn. I'm not
gonna name names, but I will say I've made every effort today to resolve my nasal issues for this episode.
Hilarious.
So.
Shoot, you didn't do what I did before this episode, which was because I'm not feeling so well. So I went into the bathroom, steamed the whole thing up, and hopefully I sound okay for the rest of the episode.
You sound great.
I sound good. Okay, good.
Well, as good as usual.
Jay. Talking about Jay.
Jay sounds great. Okay, awesome.
I always sound good.
Look, everybody loves the kibitzing. Come on.
Yeah.
Tell us about the kibitzing that we do among each other. People like that.
Yeah. So I had a great week. I was at a Hillel conference for 4 days, which was awesome. And then I was in New York where I saw a lot of friends and family, and now I'm home. No plans to travel. So you're stuck with us now weekly because we kind of were a little off schedule, but now I think are we all around now for the next foreseeable future?
I mean, if the two of you stop gallivanting around together, and get down to work like we have to do, I mean, maybe we'll get something done. You did two gallivanters.
That's right.
And the rumor was there was an education party in New York. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not. It was not. It was not an education party.
No, it wasn't education. We were the Substack. We were the Substack.
That's right.
But Jay and I did hang out in Boston, so that was nice to see you in person.
You guys in Boston. I understand Chayle took you to where she first made her big debut, coming out into the public at the Chabada's 491 Commonwealth Avenue.
Yes,
she was maybe about 2 years old, maybe 2.5. And we used to do Friday night services there, and Chayle was the waitress. She would deliver all of the fish to everybody, and at 2.5 her age, she was a public service.
Wow!
So I've had to deal with this for a number of years. I've had to deal with her.
You literally trained me in this. This is why I am the way I am.
It was your mother's idea.
Yeah, probably.
Probably. No one to blame but yourselves.
I do remember though. I'll tell you something, and I told this to Jay when we were there, but I have such a strong memory of standing at the window of the Chabad house with my grandparents, your parents, and we would pick a color, and then we would count the cars that came that was that color that we picked, and whoever had the most won. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
I didn't dream it.
Okay. No, you did not dream it. It was a front window.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really
good
nice.
Days. Those were good days.
Boston is such a beautiful city.
I love Boston.
Yeah.
I love the city of Boston.
Yeah, Boston is a great city for sure.
Now that we did Poland, we should do another trip to Boston as like a homecoming.
Right.
Since most of my siblings were born in Boston. I wasn't.
4 out of 6.
Right. 4. Yeah. Anyway,
all right.
We just to give a heads up, by the way, we're going to be featured in a magazine soon, our trip to Poland. So we'll get the word out. People can get the magazine and read everything you've already heard. You can
Vogue?
read it in print.
Is it in Vogue?
Yeah. Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair. Okay.
Yeah. So today we're starting our book club. So Jay is going to introduce the book because he doesn't trust me, which is fine. I don't blame him because my father yesterday said to me, you probably didn't even read the book. And I said, yes, I did. He goes, really? What's it about? So I said, I know it's about the War of 1812. And so then that was the beginning of everybody rolling their eyes at me.
You can't argue with that. I mean, that's
it's spot on.
Can't argue with that.
It's exactly what it's about.
I have learned American history so many times. I'm a history major. I have an undergraduate degree in history. I still don't know what the War of 1812 is about. I know all the other American wars, but that one's always been kind of a mystery to me.
What's the American Indian War about?
Okay, that was the French. There's something with the French and the Indians.
Isn't that one? The War of 1812 is the one where Will Smith is flying the alien space shuttle. Isn't that's the one? Isn't it?
Oh my God, it's one of my favorite movies.
Yeah,
one of my favorite movies. No, so we're gonna talk about the book, a very serious book, and hopefully we won't do only serious books, but we're starting with a serious book called The Sunflower by Simon Wiesenthal. And Jay why don't you start off with giving us a little bit of a background on the story?
Yeah, sure. So to start off with the author, because the author is, aside from writing the book, is a notable person. Simon Wiesenthal was a Austrian-born Holocaust survivor. And after the Holocaust, he became unquestionably the most famous Nazi hunter in history. He's credited with aiding in the capture of 1,100 Nazis after the war. Most famously, Adolf Eichmann, who was in Argentina, where a lot of the Nazis went. Wiesenthal was involved in his capture and subsequently being brought to Israel, being put on trial, and I believe he's the only person in Israeli history to be sentenced to death. I think is
correct.
Yeah.
So Eichmann has a fascinating life aside from this book. But for today, we'll talk about
Wiesenthal.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's
and in LA, I mean, the Museum of Tolerance in LA is part of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is really interesting because they do a lot of work about kind of like tolerance ideas and genocide awareness. And if you live in LA or near LA, you should definitely go visit the museum. And I have a good friend who works for the Simon Wiesenthal Center, so I want to give him a plug. He's in charge of national Holocaust education. So shout out to Richard.
There's probably a lot of people who should visit the genocide museum to get a grip on what that actually means.
I know
that's for a different discussion.
Yeah.
So anyway, in his book, The Sunflower, he recounts a story where he was a prisoner in a concentration camp. And one day he was assigned to a local hospital to do whatever, cleaning the hospital and just, doing whatever around there. And he's doing, this cleaning. And when a nurse gets him and asks if he's a Jew, and he says, yeah. And so she brings him to a room. And in the room is a dying SS soldier named Carl. And he sits down next to Carl, and Carl proceeds to tell him a story about something he did that involved there were several Jews in a house, and the Nazis machine gunned the house, threw grenades in the house, and set it on fire. And so obviously everyone inside was killed, and he was feeling guilty about that.
It was like hundreds of people. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Some of them jumped off the building, and etc.
Yeah, that family, the father, the son, and the kid.
Yeah,
they jumped out of the window.
Yeah, and so he was on his deathbed, and he confessed, such as it was, to him, and he asked for his forgiveness before he died. And Wiesenthal said, I can't, and left. And so later on, he had discussions with some friends around this. And later, he sent the story to theologians around the world and asked their opinions of that situation and what the right thing to do was. And so half the book is the story itself, and half the book are essays of various lengths, or responses, I guess, of various lengths to the situation and what they felt was the right thing for him to do in that moment. And there's other details to the story that I'm sure we'll get through.
Yeah,
but that's sort of the gist of the core dilemma.
Well, he's asking. I mean, I would just say the only thing I would add is like Simon Wiesenthal is asking a moral question here about, did he do the right thing? Should he have forgiven this SS soldier who was dying and begging for his forgiveness? Or did he do the right thing by just walking away and not doing that? And it seems like he struggled with that answer, because later he goes back and visits the soldier's mother. I mean, there's a lot more to that part, but I think the basic moral question is, do you forgive an individual who's on his deathbed and, seemingly doing a confession? And then we can talk about whether that was repentance or a confession and what the difference is. But there's a lot of interesting moral questions here. And the essays, I guess, address that as well from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So, Todd, do you want to start with first of all, what would you have done?
Okay.
Let's start with that.
So just to fill in a few of the more details.
Okay.
So the soldier tells him that he was a Catholic and grew up in the church.
Right.
Then got caught up in Hitler Youth.
Right.
And this was not him, that his father was very much against him being in the Hitler Youth. And that he, because of what was going on in Germany at the time, just got caught up, in this. And, and he just feels horrible, terribly of what he did. And specifically that instance where the family, came out of the window and that kid is haunting him because he machine gunned them down even while they were, came out alive. And it's just torturing him.
Yeah.
It's just torturing him. And this is not who he is. And he wants Wiesenthal to absolve him, Wiesenthal to forgive him. Wiesenthal says nothing says nothing there, walks out of the room.
Right.
The next day she calls him back, the nurse. He died. The SS officer told her to give Wiesenthal his possessions. He had like books and a bunch of papers. Wiesenthal refused to touch it, and he wouldn't take it from her. After the war was over, Wiesenthal tracked down the mother, went to visit the mother, and told her that he had seen the son, and the son died. Did not tell her anything about what he did and what it was, and and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that was it. Now he was racked with this moral question of whether, here's a guy that's begging you to forgive him, and he doesn't do it, and he doesn't know what to, and this is bothering him. This is bothering him. So he said, like Jay said, he sent it out to 30 well-known people around the world, jurists, novelists, and writers and theologians and all different types, philosophers, all different types of people from different religions, and asked them, did he do the right thing? Okay. So, to me, what struck me about the book is two parts. Number one, could be a very, very, very difficult question to answer, or it could be not such a difficult question to answer.
Right.
Wiesenthal, by whom he was, turned this into a very difficult question for him. I mean, when he came back later on to the concentration camp after he was finishing work at the hospital, he had two friends there. He had two Jewish friends, Joseph and Arthur. Joseph was frum, he was a religious guy. Arthur was not. But these three banded together in the concentration camp. And when Wiesenthal said to them, told them the story, Joseph, the religious one, said, "What are you talking about? Why do you even think of forgiving this guy? How could it even pass into your mind such a notion that you would forgive this guy? I mean, first of all, it's not yours to forgive.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is only dedicated to something that happened to you personally, and maybe by extension to your family, because that's also part of you. But to grant forgiveness to someone that did something that no, and there's no from the Torah's point of view, there is no hischayvus. There is absolutely no
obligation,
responsibility on you to forgive this guy. Nothing. Zero. And the mere fact that you even thought about it shocks him. Arthur, the non-religious one, is less strident, but still from the same vein. That it's not yours to forgive. He wants forgiveness. What he should have done is track down the people that he hurt and ask for forgiveness. Or if in another case, if he wanted absolution, let him go find a priest. The fact that he picked the Jew, he asked the nurse to get him a Jew, so this Jew, can somehow make him feel better, can make him feel better. That plays no part in it. In the concentration camp, among the people there was also a non-Jewish fellow by the name of Bullock. Bullock was a Christian theologian, and Bullock disagreed with them. And Bullock told him he should have, because you know what? Holding back forgiveness, in his opinion, and this is how we're going to divide it, holding back forgiveness is also a crime. If someone is begging you to forgive them, and is asking you, you're the last person that they're going to see here on earth, maybe, and he's asking you to do it, it would be a good thing to do, and you missed an opportunity. That was what the Catholic theologian told him, and I think that this kind of breaks down along these lines. When he wrote to the Jewish, thinkers, the philosophers, the authors, they were of the same. Most of them were on the same page. That it's not for you. This is not for you to forgive. I mean, you can't forgive because it was not done to you. It was not done to you. Forgiveness can only be granted. Now, there's two other issues that come into play. Number one is understanding, meaning that the Jewish writer says, we can understand him. We could understand where he's coming from.
Right.
Like here's a kid. He's a young guy. He's dying.
He was taken in by the Nazis.
He was taken in by the Nazis. They brainwashed him. Now he feels guilty and all of that stuff. So understanding, we could certainly give him. I could understand where you're coming from, but that's where we go. We draw the line. You even may go one step further with sympathy, with pity. But you know what? I feel bad for you.
Right.
You know what? Because of what you've done, and I feel that you're tortured in this. But you're not the person. You're dialing a wrong number.
Right.
You're calling the wrong number. You need either a priest or you need God Himself.
Right.
God Himself. Right. And when you go up to God and you die, you'll make it.
So let me ask you this. Here I'm just going to ask you directly.
Sure.
Did you find it a difficult, complicated question, or was it an easy moral question for you? And then I want Jay to answer too.
There's two parts here. There's the humanity, and then there's the prisoner.
Right.
Me standing there, everybody writes the same thing. It's impossible for us to know what we would have done. That's an unfair question, because I don't know what I would have done. But you can basically bifurcate two parts to this. Number one being the Jewish part, the prisoner part of Wiesenthal, and then the intellectual humanitarian part, of Wiesenthal. The Jew and the prisoner. I mean, think about it. Here was a person that didn't know if he was going to be gone that day either.
Right.
I mean, the Nazis were killing
people
indiscriminately in the concentration camps. If you limped, if you were sick, if anything, he had no clue whether he was going to see tomorrow morning. So he's going to be the one that's going to give forgiveness, to the SS officer. The other hand, so to me, that's not even an issue. To me, that's not a problem as a Jew.
Right.
I would say you did the right thing, and I applaud you, because as one of the authors wrote, I just want to read her. She's Cynthia Ozick. She's a well-known writer, a Jewish writer, and she writes in the book. I'll just get it in just 1 second, if you don't mind.
Don't worry. We're not going anywhere.
She writes at the end.
It's building the tension.
She writes she writes the longest essay. She writes the longest essay. And this, I'm just going to quote from her. She says, I discovered a quotation attributed to Hannah Arendt. Now, she herself was a controversial writer.
Yes.
The only antidote to the irreversibility of history is the faculty of forgiveness. So she writes jabbercocky.
What does that
jabbercocky. There's nothing. What does that mean? This is the only thing is jabbercocky. She is a great moral philosopher, but even Hannah Arendt cannot make a Lazarus of history. You can't bring, okay? He says, Graham Greene explains the Catholic idea of hell. What does hell mean? No longer that medieval site of endless conflagration, instead, an eternal separation from God. And this is how Cynthia ends her letter. Let the SS man die unshriven. Let him go to hell. Sooner to fly to God than he. Now, what happened? Why does she reference a fly? Because a fly flew next to his head, and Wiesenthal shushed it away. He scurried away, and the SS officer said, "Thank you." That's where the fly comes in. She says, better to fly closer to God than this guy.
Right.
Okay.
Let's hear, Jay. What did you think? What was your initial reaction to the question?
Sorry, I had an internet glitch there. Did you ask me a question?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
I asked you. No, it's okay. What was your initial reaction? What do you think? What would you do? How would you answer Simon's question?
I guess it's a question. I think it's hard to put yourself in his shoes. I mean, impossible, really. So I'll just what would I have done? I think whenever you ask anybody what they would have done in any situation, they're always the hero.
Yes.
So I think it's hard for me to say what I would have done, but I will say I'll say this: the thing that popped into my mind about the situation was I had this analogy about, let's say you're driving down the street one night and you sideswipe a car and you take out their quarter panel and take out their side mirror, and you get home and you don't want to stop because you don't want to deal with insurance and whatever. You get home, and the next day you feel really guilty about it. And there's a guy driving down the street, and you walk up to the guy's car, just a random person with a car, and he says, "Oh, you're a car owner. I just want to apologize to you. I swiped the car last night. I'm going to apologize to you because you're a car owner too. And so apologizing to any random car owner is just as good as apologizing to the person I actually wronged."
Wow.
And if you that story is it's ludicrous. I mean, it's just it's obviously ludicrous. But it's, in this situation, obviously the big difference is, no one in that situation is dying. Right.
Right.
But
how much more so?
It's the same, but it's the same concept of, can you just randomly pick out any person who fits this category roughly of people you wronged and have them absolve you for all the wrongs against that class of person? It's just, it's silly. And it's patently silly.
Right.
I think he gives a great lesson. Abraham Joshua Heschel. He's a great theologian, great thinker. He was one of the people that was asked and sent back an answer in the way, Hasidic rabbis would send it back in a story.
Right.
He sent back a story. And the story was that the grand rabbi of this particular town of Brisk was once sitting on a train, traveling with a bunch of secular people, and they started playing a game of rummy or whatever they were playing, and he didn't want to participate, and it bothered them. So they kept encouraging him to participate, and he refused. He kept refusing, and they kept urging him. Well, finally, he got to the point where he was such a nuisance because he was just sitting there and he wasn't playing, and then it was bothering them to no end, that they actually picked him up and they put him outside the car of the train.
Oh my gosh!
That's it. So they humiliated him. Okay, they come into town. Waiting at the town, there's hundreds of people waiting for the Grand Rabbi of Brisk. They see it. One of the guys who was a Jewish guy is overwhelmed with regret. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. He runs over to him and he at the train station starts crying and pleading with him, "Please forgive me." No, he refuses to forgive him. He goes home and this guy comes in and he's at the shul and he's crying and he absolutely refuses to forgive him. Finally, after a few hours, one of the sons of the Grand Rabbi comes into his dad and says to him, "Dad, I mean, the man is outside. He's beside himself. I mean, why don't you just forgive him? He says, because he did not humiliate me. He humiliated someone else. Me, the Grand Rabbi of Brisk, was not humiliated. He humiliated a person. Let him go find that person and ask forgiveness from that person.
Oh,
that was his answer.
Wow.
All right. So to Simon Wiesenthal, he said to Simon Wiesenthal, you know, he didn't do anything to you. Let him go find the people that he did, and then let him ask for forgiveness, which is another sign of saying, you know what? Like she said, let the SS guy go to hell.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason for you to extend it. Primo Levi goes one step even further. Primo Levi, the great writer, and also the Italian, he was a chemist and Holocaust survivor, wrote his story. He said the sheer egotism of this German, once again, using the Jew. Okay? Here again, you can't even leave the Jew to die peacefully. You have to put him in this quandary because you arrogant, I don't want to use the word, it doesn't use it in terrible words, but he said here again is the arrogance of this SS officer, thinking that a mere 2 minutes of reflection that he is going to, cry and say, I'm so sorry for what I did. But once again, it's the Jew that's being used over here.
But don't you think I don't know. I thought of this when I was reading it, and I'll be honest with you, I did not read all the essays. I didn't do my full homework assignment. I did like 60% of the homework assignment. But there is a difference between how Jews think about confession and regret, right? And he's not a Jewish guy, this SS officer. Like, for me, to be honest, I didn't say this yet, but for me, this was not a hard moral question. I don't think Simon Wiesenthal had any agency to forgive this guy. I mean, especially when you read the book and you read about his experience in the concentration camps and what everybody was experiencing and what happened to his family, it just heightens, for me at least, the absolute inhumanity of what the Nazis did, right? So I don't think Simon Wiesenthal had an ounce of agency to be like, yes, I forgive you. But the only thing that I did think of was that we don't really have this kind of confessional before we die type of thing, even though we do have a form of it, but we're not Catholics that if you just say what happened and, you regret it, that there's some form of forgiveness. So I think there's like a an imbalance between Simon Wiesenthal, a Jew, right, and an SS officer, a Catholic, who are coming at these things from a very different way.
No, they make it quite clear. The Christian writers, especially the religious Christian writers, write that, based on Christianity, one of the most fundamental ideas in Christianity is forgiveness.
Right.
No matter to whom, no matter to what, no matter to where. Forgive and forget. Because Jesus himself on the cross, what did Jesus say in the New Testament? Forgive them, for they do not know what they do.
Right.
Even to himself, that when people were hurting him and killing him, he was already all about forgiveness.
I can't accept that.
So it's easy, but they also write, make no mistake, like one of them, I don't remember exactly which writer, wrote, don't think that it's only been the Jews who have suffered. And not to belittle the suffering of the Jews.
No, I understand.
Christians have also suffered. We've had martyrs for the first 300 years of Christianity. There were thousands of martyrs in Christianity. So it's not like we haven't been in the position of martyrdom. Right. It's not always been that the Christians have been the perpetrators. The Christians themselves have been, victims of atrocities, and of murder, and they're expected, even at the worst case scenario, they're expected, to rise up, and to make forgiveness. Because if you don't, it's a blemish on you. It's not the blemish on the perpetrator. You're the blemish.
Right.
So to us, we come from a completely, a very, very different perspective.
Yeah.
Now, I was thinking, like, if we had read this book 4 years ago, I would not have brought this up. But now that we're post October 7th, I'm thinking to myself, what if I was an Israeli soldier in Gaza? I come into a tunnel and there's a wounded, there's a wounded
guy,
Hamasnik. There's a wounded Hamasnik, and he looks at me. He's a 20-year-old kid, and he says to me the same thing he said to this guy.
Yeah.
He says, you know what? I grew up here in Gaza. for 20 years. They've been pounding in my head, the terrible Zionist, the terrible Zionist, the terrible Zionist. I drank the Kool-Aid. I went on October the 7th. I did horrible things. I raped a girl. I killed a family, but now I'm dying and I need absolution. Please, you as an Israeli, what would you do? I'd shoot him.
Right.
I'd shoot him.
Right.
Because it's not for me. Now, does it make a difference who it is? That's another thought that came into my mind. Does it make a difference who's doing the asking? If Sinwar was sitting there and as soon as he opened his mouth, I shoot him in the head. I mean, to me, there's no question. If it's this kid of 20 years old or 18 years old who may have been a victim of brainwashing, who drank the Kool-Aid, should there be in these kind of circumstances some kind of a pass, somewhere where we can find some kind of
humanity?
Humanity,
like a compassion?
Like if Hitler versus this SS guy, I don't think it would have been a question to Simon Wiesenthal if he was sitting with Himmler in the room. If Himmler was asking him, or Eichmann was asking him for absolution or for forgiveness, I don't think that would be. But should there be, like a sliding scale between a private, this guy, grew up, caught up, versus, a hardcore, real tyrant and sadist that there were in the concentration camps? It's another question that was brought up among writers, in the book.
Well, one of the writers, I don't know, Jay, if you want to jump in here, but one of the writers, and you can respond to this, what I'm going to say, but one of the writers I don't remember which one, he wrote, how much of a person's trauma and background do we take into account when thinking about the evil that they did, right? And we encounter that all the time now, right? Somebody commits a terrible school shooting, and then we find out that they were being abused and their parents were psychotic and they were on medication. Now, I'm a human. I feel a compassion for that person. But does that mean that the person who did the school shooting should not pay a price for what they did? I mean, this is how much of a person's background and past traumas play a role. And Jay, I don't know.
Before Jay jumps in, I just want to clarify your question a bit.
Yeah.
You brought up two different issues now. One is punishment, one is forgiveness. Okay, one is punishment, one is forgiveness.
Right, that's true.
Forgiveness is easy. The mother of a, let's say, God forbid, and one of the mothers in Be'eri, or one of the mothers at the Nova Festival wants to go to the captured terrorists and say to them, "I forgive you for what you did." Now that's one thing.
Right.
Israel is not going to say, "Well, look, the mother forgave the guy
so
for killing her daughter, so we're going to let him go."
Right.
No, punishment is different. I'm sorry, Jay. Go ahead.
I lost my train of thought, but let me. I'll make a and I can remember. So to me, there are certain things that are just unforgivable, and of course you to some degree you take into account someone's background, and we were all kids once, right? Hitler was a kid once, right? But at some point, at some point, you've passed a point where it's. Those things can be considered, and you just have to look at your actions. What I think would actually be, to some degree, because to me, I agree with both of you. To me, it's a very clear case from my perspective that they should not be forgiven. What I actually think would be, to some degree, a more interesting thought experiment would be, what if there was someone who was strictly passing papers, never killed anybody, but was involved in the transportation of Jews to concentration camps. Never killed anybody, but was only involved in the process of it.
And like an apparatchik.
Well, he was an accessory.
Yeah, an accessory.
Number one, he was an accessory. Mm-hmm. Maimonides, what we talked about before, would clearly condemn him as being a victim, not a victim, but being an accessory and guilty of murder. So in that case, I don't think there would be much difference. One meaning no difference about the forgiveness part. I would not forgive him for what he's done. The other issue that came up over and over again among the Jewish writers to Wiesenthal was the idea that he only did this when he was on his deathbed. You see, this was very convenient for him.
Right.
He was there, he's dying, so why not ask for forgiveness? He didn't do this a week ago or 2 weeks ago or a month ago, searching out. One writer says, if he was really so, why didn't he just shoot in the air? Or why did he not have trouble loading his gun at that particular moment?
Right, like you could make other choices along the way.
So that's with another.
And there were Nazis who did that.
Giving him.
Right.
There were Nazis that did that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true.
In Christopher Browning's book, in Christopher Browning's book, Ordinary Men, where they're talking about the Einsatzgruppe, who were the people who just followed after the Nazis took over territories and just murdered all the Jews there. There were people there who were assigned to those groups who refused to do that.
Right.
Yes.
So there are examples of people who refused. So to me, it's not a lot, but there were people who did it. So it was an option. But to come back to that point that you just made, Rabbi, about the being on his deathbed, I think there's one writer. We talked about the writers that we've liked, and I'll talk about some of those people. But there were a couple of writers who I very much disliked their answers, and
that's good.
And one of them was actually from Providence. Edward Flannery, who was like the head of the archdiocese in Providence. And one of the things he wrote was, he said, it is a cardinal principle of Judeo-Christian ethics that forgiveness must always be granted to the sincerely repentant. So the question is, how do you know he's sincerely repentant? He's on his deathbed.
Exactly.
Is that sincerity?
Oh,
right. We're not God.
The way Wiesenthal described it made it seem that the kid was really serious because he was telling him this whole story.
Yeah, but we still can't know.
Yeah. So we're taking, at least in this story, we're taking it for granted that he was sincere. And that's where we divide. That's where we say goodbye.
Right.
To this notion. I mean, as a matter of fact, if we could drive the point home even further, among some of the writers ask the very question, is forgiveness in general a sign of condoning evil? What exactly do you want me to do? What do you want me to do, Carl? You want me to say to you that it was okay?
I know.
That what? That you're a good guy, that you want to go up to heaven with a clean slate. So when you come before God, God is going to say to you, did you make amends? And you're going to say, well, Wiesenthal forgave me. What exactly is it that I need to do with this forgiveness? Condone it? So by giving forgiveness to you, I'm actually condoning what you did to this family. So I'm not going to forgive you for this.
It's interesting you're saying that.
You didn't say that, but that's what some of the writers brought up.
Right. No, and it's interesting you're saying that, because I'm like a kind of bleeding heart sometimes. And I started in the beginning of the book because I knew where we were going. I've read this book before, but I was like, a little young guy. Carl was probably my kid's age. God knows if they got caught up in some, crazy thing, and I would want someone to have compassion on them, God forbid, in that situation. But then you read the stories that Simon Wiesenthal writes in this book, and he writes one that about how they told the parents in one of the ghettos to bring their kids to the kindergarten because they're going to get extra food, and then the Nazis took all the kids and murdered them. The parents literally brought their kids to kindergarten thinking they were going to get them extra food, and then they murdered all of them. And I thought to myself, no, like I don't. There's nothing, my forgiveness is meaningless here. This is between the Nazis and God. Like no human being, I'm sorry, but there's no human being. I don't care if it's Moses. I don't care if it's Jesus. No one can forgive what they did to humanity. I mean, they can't. It's only God. And so I think it's
they would like us to.
Yeah, but I don't, we're not.
Forgive and forget. And certainly now in Germany, they would like to do that. Like, okay, you know what? This happened 80 years ago. It wasn't us. It wasn't them. It was this and that and all of that stuff, to do that. But the bottom line is we come from a completely different worldview in Judaism. Maybe it's because we've been victims so long that we've hardened our position on this idea of forgiveness because we've been the victims. you know,
Right.
now
Right.
now that we're, you know, like who knows? No, but I could see the humanity part of it, where Wiesenthal was standing in the room as a person. You know, there,
No, I don't see it.
you don't. I
Maybe
know
I'm
you don't
mean.
see it, and
Maybe I'm
I
a bad person.
and that was one of the questions: is forgiveness, you know, like a pity
Right.
party.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you're not really forgiving him, but you feel so bad for the guy
So
that
Yeah.
you
so
want him
on
to
that,
die with something, even though it's meaningless.
Right.
so on that, I'm going to come back to this guy, Flannery again, because he wrote, of all the things in the book, there was one thing, there were a couple things, but this one in particular just stuck out in my mind as I almost threw the book out of my out of the window when I wrote this.
Yeah,
When I read this, so
yes,
he wrote.
yes.
It's a very long paragraph, but at the end of the paragraph, he says, "If Carl were to extend the scope of forgiveness to collective proportions and should die in this happy illusion, where would be the harm?" And I just where like the harm, the entire so the harm is that you fortify the belief that you can do literally anything you want in your life and be forgiven. So it literally doesn't matter how you treat anybody, because forgiveness is always at the end of the road. And I just thought this is such a warped perception of how humans should interact with each other and with God. It was just just ludicrous.
No, it's
there were a couple of lines in the book. I don't know if we could get so granular, but I just wanted to share one that, like, I don't know, this really struck me. They're talking about how difficult their life was in the camps, and Simon's describing it, and he quotes somebody as saying, and just to give a little more context, he's saying, like, you know, I don't know when I'm going to die. I don't know when Carl's going to die. And then he says the following: only another half hour till freedom, but only a quarter of an hour till death. And I don't know, that line, like, it really, you're so close. You don't know. I mean, they didn't know. Every day they thought maybe today's going to be the end, tomorrow. Like, they were trying to get little pieces of news, but they were closer to dying than they were to living. And in fact, all of his friends that he mentions in the book end up dying in the Holocaust. So it's such a real story about humanity and how I don't know, it feels so corrupt to think that Simon Wiesenthal, it's like, so I find it unfair. Like, Carl was unfair to Simon Wiesenthal. And I think he felt that way.
He wrote that. They wrote
He's
that.
like, why are you giving me this burden? Like, I don't want this burden.
It brings up a lot of different tangents.
Yeah, I know.
It brings up.
I know.
Besides Carl, forget Carl, he's an SS officer, you know.
Right.
But it brings up a lot of different tangents, because the book makes Carl into a man of conscience.
Right.
Carl is not a barbarian. There were two types of Nazis. You know, there was those ideologues like Himmler, Goebbels, that believed in the cause. There were others that went along with it because, hey, you know, this is what it is, and I'm not going to stand in the way, whether I'm afraid or whether it's good for my career or whatever. You know, you even see in Schindler's List and Schindler's story that in the beginning, Schindler was in it purely for profit. He could care less about the Jews. If a Jew could make him a buck, fine. All of a sudden, he grows a conscience.
Right.
Okay, he has to start saving Jews. Fine. So you see that there were, among the Nazis themselves, there were these two types. There were those barbaric sadists in camp, like kind of lays the story that, you know, like, it basically tortured people and enjoyed seeing the torture of people and doing that. And then there were people that we would call people of conscience.
Right.
You know, they were intelligent, but they went along with it. Okay. So now the book brings up this question: who do we condemn more? Do we condemn the barbarian because he's the cruelest, he's the sadist, you know, like, you know, he's the most malevolent person, and we want to grind him? Or do you say, wait a second, like, someone writes here a paragraph, and if you don't mind if I read it,
read it.
we condemn the intelligent man of conscience because there is a difference between him and the barbarian. Because though at heart not a savage, he allowed himself to become one.
Right.
He did not resist. It was not that he lacked conscience. He smothered it.
Yeah.
It was not that he lacked sensibility. He coarsened it. It was not that he lacked humanity. He deadened it. So here, in a way, what she's writing here is, even though the barbarian is easy to condemn and say, "Oh, look at this guy, look, he was a professor beforehand and he wasn't really into it," he became one. Yeah. There's where Carl falls into it. He may not have been a bad guy. He may have been a good kid, he went to church, did everything. His father was, again, like we had mentioned before, very much against this. And his father, died during the war.
Right.
He didn't know that he was an SS officer, whatever it was. But we're condemning you, Carl, worse than the barbarian, because you allowed yourself.
Yeah.
You allowed yourself. You want Wiesenthal. You're demanding of courage of Wiesenthal. Now, where was your courage?
Right.
As Jay had mentioned before,
right.
Where was your courage when others did it?
Right.
So in a way, it brings up this idea that people of conscience, of intellect, that allow themselves to fall into this trap are in a way worse than the barbarian. The barbarian, you see kids in school, they're just bad kids. They're just rotten kids, and they're just not nice kids. Okay, so if this nice kid spills your soda on you, it's par for the course. It's par for the course. But then you see the good kid, the kid that does everything, and he gets caught up, and then he pours it on you.
Yeah.
You're twice as livid.
Well, there's a lot of training in schools now about that, and they call it, bystander training, because that's what, and we learn it from the Holocaust, actually, where it's like these bystanders watched it happen, and maybe they weren't. I mean, Carl is not a bystander, though. I mean, Carl was a participant in the murder of the Jews.
And it's so funny. You know where this happened? You know which town it happened in?
Was it in Lemberg?
Dnipropetrovsk.
Oh, that's right. That's
where
right.
the Rebbe was born, and the Rebbe's father was a rabbi there of the Dnep. To happen in Ukraine. When I read that, it gave me shivers.
Yeah.
It gave me shivers. That the story, I mean, when talking about the story, not where Simon Wiesenthal was.
Right.
It's where Carl is telling him where he murdered the Jewish family was in the Dnipropetrovsk.
I know. I saw that. There was a thing in the beginning. I mean, this is a totally different conversation, but I don't know if we have time to talk about this, but the line about that God was on leave, I don't know if that struck either of you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That was.
I tell that story. Someone dies and goes to heaven, and he tells God a Holocaust joke.
Yeah.
God says, "I don't get it." So he says, "Well,
you had to be there.
You had to be there." Like that's been told, a million times over and over again.
Yeah.
It's that's a whole different story.
I know, but that was very powerful. Way
you're
of
talking about.
Yeah.
Where was God there and all that? That's the whole idea of, we've talked about this before, right?
Yeah.
Theodicy of, God allowing evil to happen. Here it's mostly really between man and, kind of relationships and the idea of what makes you human. I mean, if according to what Jay was saying and when Flannery is arguing, is that you're not human. If you don't forgive, you're the problem. Wiesenthal, you have something wrong with you. And a few people wrote that you know what, you have to look deep into yourself, because you didn't have the moral courage, to do that. But I dismiss it. I mean, and I think that we all agree with that. First of all, according to Jewish law, you have no responsibility. And not only you have no responsibility, you can't, even if you wanted to, forgive him. You're not the one that has to give, forgiveness to it. This is something that you have to do, Go to the person that aggrieved you.
And, on the other side, Eugene Fisher wrote that this is the final victimization of a Jew by Carl.
Exactly.
That it's his final sin is his one last victimization of a Jew.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What do you think about the symbolism of the sunflower? I thought that was interesting because in the beginning, I couldn't really think about it. Like, I didn't understand where he was going with it. But then as the story, goes on, you understand what he means. But I guess the sunflower represents humanity, right? And how every soldier is going to get buried, let's say, and they're going to have a sunflower. Yeah, they're going to get a sunflower growing out of their, grave, while he says, I'm going to end up in a mass grave with no sunflowers, and it's just represents a kind of humanity that he obviously didn't feel as, someone who was being victimized in the Holocaust. And the fact that he was being asked to give that humanity to someone who was doing, taking away his own humanity is what makes the whole story interesting, and the sunflower kind of represents that.
Yeah, it's interesting how, he walked by and saw all those sunflowers on the graves and asked himself, I'm never going to have a sunflower.
Yeah.
And none of us are going to have any kind of sunflower. And part of what the Nazis did, I mean, besides the murder of 6 million, they took away their entire identity,
right?
Of who they were. It wasn't just barbaric, just running through from town to town and killing them. They made them literally feel that they were Unmenschen.
Right.
They literally made them feel that they were not humans. I mean, they had absolutely no choice of where to go, when to go, how to go, what to eat, when to eat. All of the freedoms that we take for granted today. I mean, just, waking up in the morning, do I get out of bed? Don't go to bed. Do I eat breakfast? Don't I eat breakfast? What I eat for it? Every single decision that a human being makes was taken from them.
Yeah.
They had nothing. Viktor Frankl writes.
Oh, that's another great book.
In his book, the only thing that we had power to do was how we are going to react to this situation.
Yeah.
Were we going to just buckle down and just acquiesce, and that means you were dead? Or were we going to go to our even if we're going to our final deaths, even while you were walking towards the crematorium, how are you going to walk? That was the only thing.
Right.
The only thing the Germans could not take from you was how you are going to decision that you made and how you are going to react to certain experiences.
Right.
Think about that. I mean, it's just mind-boggling that this happened, 10 years before I was born. This did not happen in the 1500s.
You're old.
I know I'm old.
The day I realized that the Holocaust was 35 years before I was born was insane to me. I'm like, 35 years. That's nothing.
Yeah.
Like, how?
It's
you
crazy.
know people that lived through this.
Right.
That's the scary part here. That, as these Holocaust survivors, slowly but surely disappear, the rats and the rats are going to come out of the sewers to deny this whole thing. It couldn't have happened.
Jay, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
I just want to read. So Herman Keston wrote an essay these sentences, I just want to read a little bit of it. He writes like this. This is actually exactly what you were just saying. It's annoying how much one forgets, how quickly, how easily. Memory is the foundation of civilization. Without memory, we should be senseless idiots. Anyone who, after the Second World War, demands that we should forgive and forget everything is expecting us to be as barbaric as the murderers who have forgiven themselves everything and forgotten all of their inhumane deeds. And I think that's just such a powerful way of synthesizing exactly the problem with forgiving and forgetting. We can't do that. I mean, we cannot afford as a human race to forget what happened in the Holocaust. I mean, in World War II in general, even with us remembering and even with us knowing, look what happens around the world. It's just, I don't know.
So there's one other part of the story I think is probably important to talk about is Wiesenthal's meeting with Karl's mother.
Oh,
later on.
I know. I felt bad for her.
Well, I felt like that to some degree was his forgiveness of Karl, was letting her having it was really mercy, right? I mean, this woman who had literally lost everything, and just letting her, the one thing she had was the memories of her husband and her son, and letting her,
live with them.
Letting her keep those memories. Was it's forgiveness is not the right word, but it was mercy.
Right. It was compassion. Yeah. It was mercy and compassion.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And I felt sorry for her, to be honest. I didn't feel hatred towards her.
No, I felt complete pity.
Felt sorry.
pity for her, and the fact that he refused to touch his papers, that I thought was an interesting part of the story. That when she offered him the papers, he didn't want to even touch these papers. I mean, first of all, they would have probably taken it from him. I'm assuming. I mean, he's going to walk into concentration camp with Carl's biography, biography. But you had mentioned before about Richard Marcus. Says there is a Marcus here that writes, and his name is Herbert Marcus. I mean, and he was. I think this sums it up. I think I would have acted the way you did. That is to say, refuse the request of the dying SS man. It always seemed to me inhuman and a travesty of justice if the executioner asked the victim to forgive. One cannot and should not go around happily killing and torturing, and then, when the moment has come, simply ask and receive forgiveness. In my view, this perpetuates the crime. I think that sums it up for the Jewish perspective on it. Because other Christians have written differently. I would have, I should have, he should have, whatever. But I think that he rose it up, that it's a chutzpah for this guy to have asked a Jew for forgiveness. Killing, and then you go ahead and you ask for forgiveness. I think that sums it up. It's a remarkable book. It's a remarkable book.
It's a great book. It's really special.
I just want to make one other point that is probably unfair of me, but I will say it anyway. That I read a book maybe a year ago or so called
Jay's.
Is it us or him?
I think it's Jay.
Oh. Let's make fun of him while he can't.
You had a moment, Jay.
You paused for a second.
Sorry. I'm having some internet issues. So I read a book maybe a year ago or so called "The Pope at War," which is about Pius XII during World War II, and he did nothing. He only cared about protecting the Vatican's neutrality and the church's interests. He did absolutely nothing at all. I mean, and one part of the book that just it's almost hilarious that he, the fascists are there and he's supporting the fascists, and the Nazis are there supporting the Nazis. He doesn't say anything. He says nothing. And then the Americans come in and liberate them. And now there are these American GIs who are getting prostitutes. And all this, they're getting,
all of a sudden I woke up and I'm like, what's this?
You're at war. You're in Italy.
Right.
Are beautiful.
Exactly. And so now all of a sudden though, he starts complaining to the Americans about the treatment of the Italian women. And the Americans are like, are you freaking kidding? Are you joking?
Yeah.
This is where you take your stand. And so I guess the point of my story is I found it very hard to read the Catholics' response to this situation, and criticizing Wiesenthal, just knowing that whole history and knowing that what right do they have to criticize his actions in this situation when their faithful did nothing to help. So they're in no position to criticize.
Yeah. The first agreement I think Hitler made was with the Vatican. I think he wrote the first treaty was with the Vatican before anything else. So yeah. Okay. Can we
on that note,
can we make like an agreement that the next book or the next thing is not Holocaust?
It's not going to be.
It will not be. It will not be.
Nazi or Poland.
No.
These three words should be excluded from the next 4 podcasts.
Yes.
I know.
Please. People are going to start thinking, well, this is a Holocaust podcast. Anything about the Holocaust, come here, we'll tell you everything.
We should actually say we have a long list of books that we've identified to do.
And the next one's going to be funny. Like, can we pick a Woody Allen book?
Oh.
Like a Woody Allen comedy book, and just go over it.
All right.
Yes.
Regardless that he married his daughter, but who cares? Come on, and call him indiscretion. I mean, is anybody going to hold it against him?
Well, if people can send
us
ideas, if they have an idea of a book they want, that's not Holocaust related.
Not Holocaust.
Yes.
Yeah.
It will not be. Yes. Please. It will not be.
I mean,
it will not be Holocaust for sure.
Have you ever read the book As a Driven Leaf by any chance?
Oh yes, I've seen the book.
It's a book about Elisha Ben Abuya. What's his name? Elisha Ben. What's his name?
Elisha Ben Abuya. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yes. Elisha Ben Abuya. Yeah, it's a great book.
It's his name.
I know. It sounded weird. It sounded weird for a second. But I was just thinking that could be an interesting book to read. But we have other books that we have
to have something a little uplifting. A little bit uplifting. Something uplifting. But as it always works, Hitler in the 30s realized that one day he's going to have to face down Winston Churchill. Churchill was not in power at that point.
Right.
But he knew that down the line somewhere he had this inclination that Churchill is going to be his biggest adversary. So he sent in a guy to test out Churchill just to see where Churchill's head is. And he came to Churchill, and this is what Churchill said to him. Churchill said to him, go tell your boss this, that anti-Semitism is a good starter, but a terrible finisher. That's what he said to him.
That's so
Tell
good.
him it's a good starter, but it's a terrible finisher.
That's really good.
And that's the way it ended. It started that, he got a lot of popularity by being an anti-Semite, but at the end of the day, it brought him down. And good riddance.
On our last Ask a Jew episode, Yael said, we're so desperate for love. The Jews are so desperate for love that if Hitler would wear a hostage pin, we'd be like, oh, look who's wearing the hostage pin. We're so pleased that he's wearing a hostage pin, that he's invited to our Shabbat dinner.
I don't know if that's true. I wouldn't, not him.
I'm joking. I'm relaxed.
I know.
But it was funny.
All right.
Okay. If you have questions, comments, you want to unpack your feelings about the sunflower, please write to us at edJEWcationpod@gmail.com or on our Substack, edJEWcationpod@substack.com. Or Twitter. We're on X. We're on Instagram. You can find us anywhere. Yes, we're everywhere. So please write to us if you have something that you want to say about the sunflower or about anything else.
Or about my manners during the podcast.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Anyway, thank you so much, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.